come to order, and we do have a quorum present. First up, we'll be hearing SF 2729 from Senator Putnam. It's the Minitex Library Information and Resource Sharing Program appropriation. Welcome, Senator. Please introduce yourself for the record, and you may begin to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This actually could be quite quick, but I hesitate to say that because I fear that if I do, Senator Fatah will just call it a day and tell me to be quiet. So instead, this is going to be a very long presentation. Although it could really boil down to a simple statement, which is libraries are awesome. And I don't think we understand truly or appreciate just the power and capacity and the greatness that arises from libraries. We think of them as simply places where you just check out a book, but that's not really what libraries are all about. They're about curating knowledge and creating opportunities for new knowledge to be created. I can tell you this with all sincerity and all honesty, that I would not have my day job by and large, or I would not be doing the job half as well as I do if I didn't have access to all kinds of materials throughout the state. Individual libraries tend to specialize to a certain extent sometimes, but if you need access to an important book or an important document, you need access to that information throughout the whole state. It improves the way we think, not just the information we have access to. And librarians obviously are brilliant at curating and developing the information that we need to make us all smarter. So libraries are wonderful things. Minitex is essentially, our friends who are librarians can explain this at greater depth than I could, but it's basically kind of interlibrary loan to a certain extent. If you need a book or you need an idea or you need something from a different space in the state because of your own research or because you want to teach it to the students here in your classroom, having access to that information throughout the whole state is a fundamental good. And I do want to just for a second explain how I don't think we really understand what university faculty do. We teach, but we are also responsible for the knowledge that we teach, which is why we don't teach as much as people do in high schools. Because we're supposed to be developing new ideas and new ways of thinking about different issues, and we do that through access to information. And Minitex is essential in that project, essential. It's not a nice, cool thing to have interlibrary loan. It is essential to the work of faculty at our universities throughout the state. So, Mr. Chair, the bill that we have before us responds to some contingencies and crises and challenges that libraries are facing right now in the state of Minnesota. Things are getting more expensive everywhere. And so what this bill would essentially do would be to add another $1.5 million per year for the next 2 years, not to make gold books, not to put doilies on library chairs, but to do the very basic work of making sure that our archives and our libraries are not just up to date and solid, but are accessible to everyone in the state of Minnesota, not just people who happen to live near a particular library and have a card. So, Mr. Chair, this increased appropriation would enable Minitex and librarians throughout the state of Minnesota to keep doing the great work that they are doing, rather than to submit to the crisis that's before them right now and enable them to do the great work that they can. So, Mr. Chair, that is the bill. Thank you for consideration.
Thank you, Senator Putnam, and I understand that we have a technical amendment to the bill. I would like to defer to Ms. Bird for the explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because the original bill includes the fiscal year 2026 and 2027, and there is already a appropriation of $6,708,000 in the current budget for 2027, my understanding is that we would want to amend this bill as follows. On line 1.6, delete everything before the second and insert $1,500,000. Also on line 1.6, delete are and insert is. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Are there any questions from members? Senator Putnam, would you like to move the oral amendment?
I would, and thank you, Ms. Bird, for arranging that. In the spirit of dealing with libraries, this is an archaic, archived version of the bill. that needs to be updated to our current moment. Thanks for getting that, Joe.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? The amendment is adopted. First up, for our first testifier, we have Karen Quayle, the Executive Director of Library Services and Online Learning for Minnesota State University, Moorhead, who I believe is online. Welcome, Ms. Quayle. You may introduce yourself for the record and begin. Hi, Ms. Quayle. Can you hear us on the Zoom?
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Quayle. You may begin your testimony. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Karen Quayle, and I serve as the Executive Director of Library Services and Online Learning at Minnesota State University, Moorhead. I am here today in support of SF 2729 and to urge sustainable funding for Minitex. Minitex is a core statewide infrastructure for libraries and higher education. It helps institutions like ours reduce duplication, share expertise, and stretch public dollars further through shared services and cooperative purchasing. At Moorhead, we see that impact directly. This academic year, our library has helped students save more than $160,000 in course material costs. Minitex contributes to that success through MNOP, the Minitex Network for Open and Affordable Practices, which helps campuses expand affordable course materials and lower costs for our students. Minitex also supports student success through Ask MN, which connects students with a librarian 24/7. Given our staffing constraints, this is a level of service we could not provide on our own. In addition, our library acts as a hub for regional interlibrary loan services. Minitex support, including the Last Mile grant, helps extend library resources and services into rural communities where local collections and staffing may be limited. Minitex also delivers major value through cooperative purchasing. Last year at MSU Moorhead, Minitex cooperative purchasing for learning materials saved us approximately $156,000. And those savings matter not only for our budget, but for our students. At Moorhead, we are expanding opportunities for students and our region through our Institute of Applied AI. As our university advances access to AI learning, the library serves as a central support for AI literacy across the undergraduate and professional learning experience. Our goal is simple. It's to prepare every student for an AI-enabled workforce and society. And that means more than introducing AI tools. It means helping students and faculty use them responsibly and effectively, knowing how to evaluate outputs, recognize AI's limitations, identify bias, and make good decisions about when and how AI should be used. And this is an area where libraries are especially well-positioned to lead. Information literacy is a key foundation of AI literacy, the same skills libraries already teach, evaluating credibility, recognizing bias, and using information responsibly are all essential when working with AI-generated content. At Moorhead, the library is partnering with the Institute of Applied AI to build a practical, scalable AI literacy framework for students and faculty grounded in access, ethics, and responsible use. So in the simplest terms, Minitex helps us do two things at once. It helps us protect affordability and access today, and it helps us invest in Minnesota's future workforce. Thank you for your time and your consideration of SF 2729 and continued funding for Minitex. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Ms. Quayle? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we have Lisa German, University Librarian and Dean of Libraries, University of Minnesota, as well as Gretchen Turke. I apologize if I mispronounced that name, from St. Benedict and St. John's University. Welcome. You may both begin.
Thank you. Dear Chair Fateh, Vice Chair Putnam, and members of the Senate Higher Education Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of Minitex Library Appropriation SF 2729. There's much I could share with you with regard to the impact of our work. For example, the importance of having one of the top 10 public research libraries in the country in your own backyard, or the tens of thousands of books and articles we circulate across the state of Minnesota from our academic library collections, thanks to Minitex, or the hundreds of programs we host each year for our students and for the Minnesota community. But today I'll focus on the importance of libraries in support of the healthcare workforce and fostering healthy communities. Librarians in our health sciences library work with every future doctor, nurse, dentist, pharmacist, veterinarian, and public health practitioner across the University of Minnesota's Twin Cities, Duluth, Rochester, and St. Cloud campuses. Ours is one of many academic libraries across the state that prepares our state's future healthcare workforce, and that benefits from the cooperative purchasing made available through Minitex. Effective healthcare requires access to reliable, high-quality information. Professional-level health information is only available through costly licenses from publishers. That means that our state's healthcare workforce has unequal access to the information they need to support their work and to promote patient engagement and informed decision-making. The ability of libraries to provide access to good information, good health information, makes a difference. Take, for example, the story of our nursing librarian, Liz. After 8 years of working with the nurse midwifery program, Liz had the opportunity to experience the outcomes of her work when she gave birth to her first child. Because Liz had her prenatal visits and delivered her baby at the University of Minnesota, she received care from several nurse midwives and students that she had worked with as a librarian. Liz saw firsthand how her work teaching students how to find and assess health information helped them make informed patient care decisions. She tells of her experience. It was powerful to be on the other side of things, experiencing care, and to realize this is the reason that health science librarians do what we do. Liz's experience exemplifies the important role that access to quality health information plays in supporting successful healthcare outcomes and advancing the health of Minnesota's communities statewide, an outcome that can be strengthened through a Minitex increased appropriation. This would help libraries like ours and academic libraries all around the state provide more uniform access to quality health information so that we might all be as fortunate as Liz to have confidence in our healthcare choices. Thank you once again for this opportunity to testify and to support SF 2729.
Thank you so much. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Gretchen Shirkay, and I am the Director of Libraries at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to speak to the committee today and to voice my support for SF 2729. As the Director of Libraries at 2 private undergraduate liberal arts institutions, our primary mission is to foster curiosity, creativity, and innovation, develop students' ability to think critically, and to help prepare our graduates to achieve their dreams. The libraries strive to deliver on this promise and commitment to student learning by prioritizing opportunities to engage students in experiential learning. Many of the things that I will discuss today would not be possible without the financial support that Minitex provides for our collections and interlibrary loan services. This support frees institutional funds that allow us to create technology-rich learning spaces for our students and to embed deeply in the classroom with our faculty. Through project-based learning, we help students engage with an increasingly complex information ecosystem, determine how to ground their own scholarship and creative expression in the expertise of others, practice applying critical thinking in new and different contexts, and develop the skills that are most sought by employers and graduate programs. A few examples I would like to share today include a course that we teach across many disciplines, where we guide students through a project that asks them to manipulate news images using AI, and then examine the impact that it has on the way that they interpret the information that they're viewing. We then ask them to reflect on how this might change their interactions with news and information in the future. In partnership with a marketing course in global business leadership, students researched a specific organization and market, and then utilized the Makerspace and Clemens Library to create t-shirts that would be used as part of their marketing strategy. They then presented their promotional materials and justified their choices using industry research and marketing theory. As part of the Great River Covenants Project, a digital humanities collaboration among many central Minnesota institutions and the University of Minnesota's Mapping Prejudice Project, our librarians partnered with faculty to support students at CSB and SJU to find, research, and evaluate property deeds in Stearns County and explore the presence of racial covenants outside the Minneapolis-St. Paul urban core. The libraries and a computer science faculty member partnered to develop a technology-rich project in the course video game design, as part of which we teach visual literacy, copyright, and maker literacy as students develop and create an arcade game that will reside in the library for other students to play. As a last note, student employment is one of the most ubiquitous high-impact practices that can happen on a college campus. Over the last year, we have created a curriculum that undergirds our student employment program and helps to ensure that the students who work in our libraries graduate with strong professional competencies that align with our institutional learning goals. This work utilizes LinkedIn Learning modules that wouldn't be available without our fabulous Minnesota public libraries. Thank you again for allowing me to share with you the learning opportunities at CSB and SJU that Minitex funding helps to make possible, and to support my support for SF 2729.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions from members for our testifiers? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we have Chris Corley, the Dean of Library and Learning from Minnesota State University, Mankato. Oh, sorry, as well as Sarah Hawkins, Legislative Chair, Minnesota Library Association.
Sure.
Welcome. Please introduce yourselves for the record, and you may begin your testimony.
Chair and members of the committee, my name is Chris Corley. I'm Dean of Library and Learning at Minnesota State University, Mankato. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of SF 2729. As a key participant in statewide library initiatives, all of our libraries here provide access to information resources that ensure all Minnesotans, regardless of income, social standing, or geography, can gain reliable information assistance and engage with physical and digital materials. Today, I'll share my thoughts about the significance of academic libraries as essential partners in community development. This work is in part made possible by Minitex support for libraries throughout the state. Funding Minitex eases budgetary concerns on Minnesota educational institutions, allowing us to focus our resources on the needs of our campus and region. To cite one example of our work, our Dr. Mary T. Dooley MAPS library staff have made accessible digital resources for city, county, and state to understand land use changes and plan for future economic development. We are continually identifying and digitizing unique regional maps, including maps too large for government offices and cultural heritage institutions to scan. This ensures dependable access for government offices, businesses, and researchers. Whether it is our Works Progress Administration city plat maps or our air photo collections commissioned by MnDOT between 1957 to 2006, our materials are used by city, county, state, federal agencies, and businesses to plan economic development and research land use. The city of Mankato uses our collections to investigate potential remediation projects when revitalizing the community. The DNR and USDA use them to explore wetlands. The Farm Service Agency uses our collection to verify the location of field tile lines and easements. Local farmers seek information to better understand their land and improve crop yields. And our own engineering students recently partnered with a local township to understand erosion and drainage for significant road projects. Our community and economic development efforts are often firmly based on our ability to preserve the unique local history of our region. Minitex services assist us in focusing on our regional and local needs. Academic libraries across the state are essential partners in community development, strengthening economic mobility, supporting civic life, preserving local history, and providing equitable access to information across Greater Minnesota. Your support of SF 2729 helps to ensure that we can continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Hawkins, the Assistant Director at Anoka County Library and Legislative Chair of the Minnesota Library Association. I'm also a proud Benny grad and former SB-SJU library worker and would not be the librarian I am today without that foundation. So Senator Putnam, thank you for your role in that amazing community. I'm here today to ask you to support Senate File 2729. I'm here both as a representative of the broader library ecosystem and in my specific role as a public library that benefits from Minitex, and to provide information on how Minitex supports Minnesota's educational and cultural institutions. Minitex amplifies the impact of long-standing state and local investments by extending the reach of Minnesota's library and cultural heritage collections. Through partnerships with college and university libraries, state agencies, public libraries, and local historical societies and museums, Minitex makes their collections visible and usable across the state and beyond. These services support Minnesotans in very practical ways. At Anoka County Library, a man preparing for the EMT test came in looking for study resources. A librarian connected him with an eLibrary Minnesota tool that includes practice tests and flashcards. He was thrilled that he could study on his phone, signed up for a library card, and spent the afternoon preparing for his new career. Another patron shared that during a doctor's visit, the doctor tried to show her images related to a diagnosis, but could only find artistic renderings online. She used a health resource from Minitex to access evidence-based medical images and descriptions, which she then shared with her doctor to better understand her condition. A non-traditional college student told us she earned all A's in her first term of online classes. She relied on interlibrary loan, AskMin's 24/7 chat reference service, and eLibrary Minnesota resources to rebuild her research skills and stay on track academically. Our online college students locally rely on interlibrary loan to access required textbooks for their courses, often saving themselves hundreds of dollars each term. Last example, one mother regularly borrows children's books in her family's native language so her kids can grow up confident in both English and her home language. These examples illustrate how statewide library services support education, workforce preparation, and informed decision-making across all ages. Cooperative purchasing through Minitex also creates substantial cost avoidance. Anoka County Library's estimated e-resource savings are just over $973,000. That's a big number. Professionally, when you ask members of the Minnesota Library Association, which represents public, academic, school, and special libraries, what their highest priority is, they consistently and uniformly point to protecting and sustaining Minitex because of the essential services it provides. Minnesota's statewide library network strengthens access, efficiency, and collaboration across educational and cultural institutions and directly supports Minnesotans in their daily lives. Please support Senate File 2729. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Are there any questions from members? Senator Verbein.
I don't really have a question, but I just want to say it's good to see you again. We really appreciated the presentation in Ed Finance, especially learning about how vendors are making it really difficult to do interlibrary loaning. So I know this work is very important, but that has stayed with many of us, so I wanted to make sure you knew that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and probably for either fiscal staff or Senator Putnam. What was the amount of funding last year in the funding side of our committee? We must have funded an amount, did I hear, was it like 6 million? I mean, now we're looking at $1.5 million request per the 2 years, correct? So I guess I'm wondering what's already in place, and then, again, what we're putting on top.
Ms. Byrd?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Senator. In last session, 2025 special session laws, there was $6,655,000 appropriated in fiscal year 2026 and $6,708,000 for fiscal year 2027.
Mr. Chair, Senator Aki,
Senator Putnam.
the distinction, the delta here is in the original version of the bill has those full totals, which is why it was shifted to 1.5 million per year, because that's the change.
Senator Arki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, because now it brings the request back to just add on. But as long as we're talking about what the current biennium is, do you know what the biennium was before? What I'm trying to understand is the stepping stones from what it was to the request that we have before us today.
Ms. Byrd, do you have those previous numbers?
I don't have that in front of me, but I can look that up and a few minutes have that ready for
No
you.
worries. Maybe Senator Putnam?
But, yes.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to pretend like I knew this when I just was whispered to me by our dear friends librarians. Imagine that. They have access to proper information.
And good memories.
And good memories. Apparently, Mr. Chair, Senator Aki, the last increase was in 2024.
2014.
2014. So never mind.
Yeah, the last increase was in 2014 to Minitex's base funding.
Okay. So we've been,
Senator Arki?
Mr. Chair, we've been running pretty much flat for the 10 years leading up to it. So, okay, now I understand where we're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Senator Kupek?
So I guess I'll just ask two quick questions then. In terms of the extra funding, what will you be able to do, and how will it enhance the system if you add this funding on?
Ms. Hawkins?
Yeah, a lot of this is related to, so I can pull up this exact number. Hold on a second. So since 2014, electronic resources for libraries have increased 34 to 63%. So the cost of our services have increased. Minitex, thanks to cooperative purchasing, they've been able to hold those increases much lower than that. But really, at this point, we're getting diminished returns on purchasing our e-resources as a good example of that. Another example is we're expecting 58% increase in courier contracts for statewide delivery. So to be able to maintain statewide delivery at the same rate. A lot of it is maintaining the services that we have come to expect out of Minitex.
Senator Kupek?
And then the follow-up, because I think that you said there's a savings by you using Minitex of
Correct.
$973,000, I think I wrote down.
Correct.
And is that just for a year?
Anoka County Library sees that.
Okay. So what overall, do you have any estimation of what the savings would be system-wide? I mean, what we're saving in other places?
Yeah.
Ms. Hawkins?
I don't have that total
Okay.
right now. I do know, I do one more number. So if you pull us and Anoka Tech is 248,000. So Anoka County Library, 973, Anoka Tech, just one other college example, their estimated cost savings is, or cost avoidance is 248,000.
So if it's just those, Mr. Chair, if it's just those two entities, obviously at that much, it would not take long with
Correct.
the number of counties, colleges, cities to see that, an investment here, it actually produces savings long-term across those.
Absolutely.
If we did dynamic scoring of a budget, you guys would really be on champions here.
Thank you, Senator Kupek. Are there any further questions from members? Seeing none, any final thoughts, Senator Putnam?
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you to
Chair.
the testifiers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the testifiers for being here and sharing their wisdom as librarians as well. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time. You know, we have plenty of information in these things, and most of it's stupid, right? And it's stupid because it's not curated by smart people like librarians. And we shouldn't have access to knowledge and quality information decided by your zip code, not in a state like Minnesota. And that's what Minitex allows us to solve. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Putnam. And with that, Senate File 2729, as amended, is laid over.
Cool.
Next up, we have the presentation from the Office of Higher Education on the state grant and North Star Promise projections report. First up, we have Megan Flores, who is the manager of state financial aid programs from OHE, as well as Nicole Whalen, who is the state grant research manager from OHE. So, welcome. Please introduce yourselves for the record, and you may begin.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Good afternoon, Chair Fateh, members of the committee. My name is Megan Flores, for the record, and I am the Director of State Financial Aid Programs for the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. We have several new members with us today, as well as some veteran members of the committee, so I thought it would be helpful to go over some basic things about our primary need-based financial aid programs, since it's been a while since we were all together. Thought we'd start out with some basic information about the Minnesota State Grant Program, share some information on how the program operates, how students apply for the resources, how they find out about their eligibility, talk through how we model spending for the program, and then discuss our current situation of available resources and seeing the student demand for those resources exceed that availability. We're also going to take a look at what the statute directs OHE to do in a situation when those resources exceed the demand, as well into dive into our projections and hopefully during session find some possible solutions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and talk a little bit more about how financial aid works in the state of Minnesota, specifically with a state grant. In order to be considered for the state grant and most forms of Minnesota financial aid, students complete the free application for federal student aid, which is commonly known as the FAFSA. This is an annual application. It's universally used across the United States for all states and territories. And to apply for federal aid as well as most forms of state financial aid. Most institutions piggyback on that, and they also use that information to make decisions about need-based institutional aid. The application process includes creating a federal student aid ID or a studentaid.gov account, which requires submitting identity information, including name, address, social security number, and then also for dependent students, which are dependent based on ED's definition, not the IRS definition. They also enter information about their parent, now with a FAFSA simplification called a contributor. Now, we no longer have the IRS data retrieval tool, which was an optional tool students and families could use. Anyone who files the FAFSA must consent to have that tax information brought in, so it's brought in for all folks who file the FAFSA. And then a need analysis formula is completed, which is a formula completed through Congress or approved by the federal Congress, and it's a universal way for all applicants to be measured in the same way, regardless of where in the country they go to school or what state they live in. So that result of that math is called the Student Aid Index, the SAI, used to be called the EFC. And that's really what is used to determine need-based financial aid for federal aid as well as most forms of state aid. Additionally, the federal student aid processor will flag certain records for additional verification if there are oddities for that application, including any kind of suspicion of a fraudulent application that gets triggered on the application. So that's essentially kind of how the application process works. For the past almost 60 years, Minnesota has invested in a vibrant economy by recognizing the public good that having an educated workforce provides for our state. The Minnesota State Grant is a need-based financial aid program. It was established in 1969 to assist eligible Minnesotans in pursuing undergraduate degrees at both public and private institutions in Minnesota. So our grant is not transportable. You have to attend an institution in our state. And this slide here provides a snapshot of our most recent completed academic year. We had about just under 76,000 students receive benefits from the Minnesota State Grant Program. 2/3 of them were dependent students. We have about over 80 institutions participating. And the annual appropriation is just over $247 million. The average award last year was just under $3,000, and about 60% of the recipients have family adjusted gross incomes less than $40,000 per year. We do see that the vast majority of recipients attend our public institutions, with a little bit over 60% at our Minnesota State colleges and universities, and about 17% at the University of Minnesota campuses, and then the remainder of recipients at our private institutions. The goal of the program really essentially boils down to trying to distribute a finite amount of resources to the most amount of Minnesota students possible to make the attainment of a credential at one of our institutions reality. The program is prohibited from operating on a deficit. As many of you are familiar, our state constitution prohibits that. And so in order to avoid that, we carefully monitor the spending in the program. The law does require that the Office of Higher Education engage in public projections twice a year, once on November 1st, and then again on February 15th, which we just did earlier this month, and we share those with key stakeholders. When we perform those projections, we base them on both internal data available to the agency as well as external data. The internal data involves a full simulation of the last year's applicant data, as well as looking at a monthly comparison we do of looking at the cash flow, the distributions or the disbursements to our campus partners versus what we're seeing in those projection numbers. And then externally, we take into several factors, things like enrollment projections directly from our participating schools, the tuition and fees that they're projecting for the public institutions, and then the wage estimates we receive from MMB on the state tax filers. Despite our best efforts, sometimes the projections can shift. Given the number of inputs that go into those projections, there are a variety of different factors that are outside the agency's control that impact that. For example, we request estimated changes in enrollment and estimated tuition and fees from our campus partners, but that work of our campus partners, they're also giving their very good best faith efforts of what those might be. And so when that enrollment can shift or change from what is predicted, which is not uncommon because, students, they change the number of credits they're going to take. They change the level of enrollment they have. Sometimes they actually, students don't show up when you anticipate they will be. And there are other financial constraints students experience. Tuition and fee increases, again, are the very best guess, but they're also estimated and they're ultimately decided by the governing structures of the schools much later than when we do our projections. There are two significant changes that occur at the federal level that impact our projections that are outside our control, and really that comes down to that federal needs analysis formula that is governed by the federal Congress and how the SAI is determined, as well as the Pell Grant funding and the Pell Grant awards. The recent challenge with the federal level, they're also having with the CBO recently projecting for the next fiscal year a $12 billion shortfall in the Pell program. So when we project for state grant, we take into into account all the various inputs, we assume some changes. We run that full simulation based on the completed prior year, and then we determine if we need to make any changes to state grant parameters, either to compensate for underspending or to adjust because we anticipate a deficit. In the event of a projected deficit, which historically has been rare but more common recently because of significant changes in enrollment as well as that large change to the federal formula, we basically have three options. The first option is to follow the directive in law, which is of course what we always do, which tells us what we have to do when there is an insufficient appropriation. We have to make adjustments to the parameters for the awards, which other words means ration the awards. The other options are requesting additional funds from the legislature or requesting parameter changes to the law, which of course falls to legislative approval as well. Coming back to kind of how all this impacts students, Minnesota residents who apply for financial aid via the FAFSA, kind of how it works is that they're going to fill out that application, either the state financial aid application or the FAFSA. They're going to have that federal needs of analysis formula performed, and then the record or the results are sent to the schools that the student selects, as well as to the Office of Higher Ed. And then once the college or university receives that information, they're going to make sure the student's admitted, and then they're going to verify the student meets the resident student definition and requirements for the program, and then go ahead and make an estimated award. It's important to note that if a student is considering several different institutions, they might not get the same state grant award at those various institutions because each institution might have different factors like tuition and fees and the availability of institutional aid and things like that. So the awards differ from school to school. What they do then is they notify via a financial aid award notice an estimated award. Most of the time that's initially including those words about it being estimated, which kind of indicates there are possible changes to the award because of things like tuition and fees that haven't yet been set for the year, and then also taking into account any legislative action that might occur during session. So that's kind of how that process impacts the students when they see that estimated award and then later when they get a final award. Again, coming back to when we project a deficit, the statutory language indicates we have to reduce awards in order to cover the deficit. Those deficit parameters, when we have a shortfall, we're obligated to add a surcharge to the applicant's assigned student family responsibility, and we also have to increase the a surcharge to the family responsibility and increase the applicant's assigned student responsibility. And those two offsets have to be done in equal dollar amounts. We try to be incredibly thoughtful about the impact to try and keep students as whole as we can and communicate these changes as quickly as we possibly can with our financial aid partners. Historically, these deficits are rare. In fact, over the past 25 years, we've only experienced deficits in the program 4 times, but we are currently experiencing a deficit. When we have that structural deficit, we want to be partners with this body as well as the House to explore options beyond the insufficient appropriation language, which does ration awards for students so that we can find a way to collaborate and stabilize the program. Some of those options, again, as I mentioned earlier, include increasing the appropriation or adjusting the parameters within the program. A few things I want to highlight related to the interplay between kind of federal aid and state aid. The FAFSA process itself, which has stabilized gratefully in this current cycle, once we got over the bump of FAFSA simplification, and the federal Pell Grant do play a pretty critical role for the Minnesota State Grant and the way they interact. And so if we do have those delays, that can be problematic. If the student aid index gets changed through federal congressional activity, that has a fairly significant impact to the Minnesota State Grant. And when we see changes to the applicant pool of students with a negative student aid index, also can impact the state grant program. When we see those reductions in the Pell Grant awards that results in an increase in the state grant award, because the formula is designed to build upon it. And so we're closely monitoring right now that federal shortfall that I mentioned from the Congressional Budget Office. Before I pass it over to my colleague Nicole, I wanted to kind of refresh everyone's memory as to what were the modifications made to the program last session. So the changes that were approved by the legislature were to lower the living and miscellaneous expense allowance from what was 115% down to 106%. An increase in the family responsibility for dependent students from 79% of the federal needs analysis to 95%. And then the four-year tuition and fee cap had been set at the highest priced public four-year institution. Last year in session, that was changed to cap it at the fiscal year 25 rate plus 2%, and then that rate plus an additional 2% for fiscal year 27. And then the state grant deadline was also moved. So it was moved from what had matched the federal Pell Grant at the last day of the fiscal year to the 30th day of the term for which the student applies for the grant. And then the final change that was made was an adjustment to the lifetime eligibility for the program. That also had matched the Pell Grant at 12 semesters of receipt of the grant, moved down to 8 semesters of receipt of the grant or the equivalent. So that's kind of bringing us to where we'll now move into a little bit deeper dive related to the projections and where we're seeing things now.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Nicole Whalen, and I am the State Grant Research Manager at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. So now I'll be digging into more of the numbers on the state grant program. So to start us off, I have a chart here that is showing combined state grant and Pell Grant awards by family adjusted gross income for last year. Here you can see that Pell Grants start to drop off around $50,000 or $60,000 a year family AGI, while state grant continues to provide grants to students at larger incomes. So although more than half, of state grant recipients have family incomes below $50,000 a year, state grant also serves a much more middle income population than Pell Grant does. One of the things that my colleague Megan alluded to earlier was the recent Pell shortfall that was announced. So as she said, currently the CBO is projecting a nearly $12 billion shortfall for the Pell Grant through the end of next year. This shortfall is caused by some of the same factors that are impacting spending in the state grant program. So those include things like increased enrollment and increased family need due to changes in the federal needs calculation. And one thing I want to note is that although the Pell Grant program can operate at a deficit, so at this point, there's no official change in the Pell Grant maximum that has been announced. However, I do want to note that if there is any modification to the Pell Grant award, that typically $100 change in the Pell Grant maximum results in a $5 to $6 million change in state grant spending. So specifically for state grant, we are seeing higher enrollment, but the chart on the right shows year-over-year increases in state grant applicants as well, and in many cases, those changes vastly exceed both estimated and actual enrollment changes reported by the systems. So what we're seeing is more students and more FAFSA filers at the same time. Additionally, changes to the federal needs analysis resulted in lower SAIs for most students when compared with the previous calculation. The SAI stands for Student Aid Index, and it is a measure of the family's ability to afford a college education compared to the previous calculation, which was termed the expected family contribution. In both cases, the state grant award formula uses that number in order to calculate the student state grant award. So what we're seeing is after the FAFSA Simplification Act, we have lower SAIs for most students across the board, and a much larger pool of students who had a $0 or less SAI. Among that group, the vast majority of these students had a negative $1,500 SAI, which is the lowest that it can go. That trend does seem to be holding steady this year. Last year, we had to approximate this data in our estimates, but going forward, we will have a much clearer picture of the impacts of the FAFSA Simplification Act and how those impact state grant spending. So in November of 2025, OHE projected a spending deficit in both years of the biennium for the state grant program. In order to address this deficit, we used our transfers authority in statute to move resources from fiscal year 2027 to fiscal year 2026 and announced estimated mandatory award parameters for state grant that reduce awards to all students in fiscal year 27 in order to ensure that we do not exceed the appropriation for the program. I want to also note that although OHE does not project into the next biennium during a non-budget year, most likely we will continue to see deficits like this in future years unless long-term changes are made to the program. So here's a closer look at those numbers. The base resources line at the top reflects that transfer. So we did transfer $60 million from fiscal year 27 to fiscal year 26. And then you'll see that resources then are larger in 26 and then lower in 27. So overall, with the rationing that we've announced, we do anticipate an $8 million balance in the program at the end of the biennium, which for reference is less than 2% of total resources. So it's still a very tight margin, and that rationing does reduce awards to all students in fiscal year 27. Okay, and then last but not least, it's also really important to note that any change to the state grant program has a reciprocal effect in the North Star Promise program because that is a last dollar program that relies on state grant awards in order to calculate the North Star Promise grant. Because the state grant awards were rationed for next year, that increased estimated spending in the North Star Promise programs significantly. And as a result, our agency has used additional statutory authority that we have in the North Star Promise program language that allows us to limit the amount and/or size of awards. And we have used that authority to institute a priority deadline of June 1st, 2026 for students to receive North Star Promise funding. So based on prior year applicant behavior, we felt comfortable that we should be able to fund applicants to the program through that date. And that is officially all we have, so we're welcome to take questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Whalen. And I believe the last slide isn't in the packet. Do you mind sending it over to the committee members at the end? Thank you so much. Are there any questions from members? Senator Utke and then Senator Putnam. Senator Utke.
You were just too slow to the draw there, Putnam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you, just back a couple slides. You had mentioned that Pell Grants can have a shortfall. They're a federal payer, but are you saying that they can run into negative? Who ends up carrying the bill on those then? Is it the institutions, or there's got to be a shortfall somewhere if they're running in a deficit?
Ms. Flores or Ms. Whalen?
Chair Pate, Senator, I believe that's called the federal deficit. I think it's just the federal deficit. It goes towards the federal government can run on a deficit and the state government cannot. And so at the federal level, programs run on deficits.
Okay.
So, but it does not, to answer your other question, the second part of your question, it does not impact the institution. This institution doesn't have to come up with those additional Pell dollars, and neither does the individual student. It really falls on the taxpayers at the federal level.
Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, because it just didn't quite make sense, but we all understand that, the trillions of dollars of debt out in Washington, D.C., this just adds to it. But at least our institutions, everybody here is held harmless, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Putnam.
We look a lot alike, so sorry for that. Thank you very much for the thorough presentation. I do have a question. I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but I am curious if you could characterize the fiscal cost or consequences or implication of for-profit universities to the state grant. How much state grant resources, if you're aware, go to for-profit colleges and universities, and are you able to characterize a little bit more about those institutions? Are they all professional programs? They're all clearly housed in Minnesota. They're not online institutions and things like that. But can you tell us a little bit more, if you're able, about those institutions, the kinds of educations they're giving, the students they're serving? Again, too ambitious a question, but also how much money is going to them from the state grant?
Ms. Whalen or Ms. Flores?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Putnam. So I can speak to for-profit institutions that participate in the state grant program. Obviously, we have quite a variety of educational institutions in the state that don't. So last year, fiscal year 2025, there were around 2,800 students that received state grants that were at private for-profit institutions. So that's about 2,800 out of around 76,000. And overall, institutions in that sector received roughly $6.5 million in Minnesota state grants. I would say by and large, and this is just me looking at my list of institutions here, the majority of these institutions are small cosmetology schools, with the exception being Rasmussen University, which is one of the larger and four-year for-profit institutions.
Thank you. Are there, Senator Verbain?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad folks went ahead of me because I was trying to remember all of these pieces of the state grant that are so complicated that you all are able to tell us with such ease. So thank you. Can you remind me, I know we increased assigned family responsibility for the dependent students from 79% to 95%. What was it previously for independent students and then independent students with dependents? What was the previous percentage, and then were there changes that we made last year? I'm just trying to remember those three numbers.
Ms. Whalen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Verbain. There was not a change made to those numbers during the last legislative session. So the change was only made to dependent students. So for independent students with children, that assigned family responsibility is 71% of the federal needs analysis. And then for independent students without children, the assigned family responsibility is 35%.
Thank you, Mr.
Verbain.
Chair. This is starting to come back to me. And then we had allowed for that surcharge, right, to exceed 100%. But I know we had just included some language to make sure that it keeps the proportions that we had set, right? So when you have 95, 71, 35, and if you need to go over 100, you're keeping that same distance that we have. And that's correct.
Ms. Whalen or Ms. Flores?
Thank you, Chair Fateh, Senator. Yes, that's correct. So would we apply the rationing? We're equally applying the surcharge across those different definitions. So for our estimated parameters for the coming aid year, that percentage now for dependent students is at 185% of federal needs analysis. For independent students with dependents, it's 138% of the federal needs analysis. And just want to highlight for those two populations that Minnesota is measuring needs analysis higher than the federal government due to our requirement to ration. And then for independent students without dependents, it's at 68%.
Great.
Senator Verbain?
I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from members? Senator Clark?
Thank you, Chair Faute. And this may be a question for us. but perhaps you know, have we looked at, and the Senate looked at providing legislative direction on you should not spend more than 55% or 60% in the past, or has this been, all right, spend what is needed and the intention is that we backfill? This is sort of our second biennium in a row where we had wonderful enrollment above and beyond keeping kids here in Minnesota to go to college instead of going elsewhere. So great program, love it, we're here. But it was the intention that, you know, if this happens, we just legislatively look at it. And so this is, maybe Senator Heinzman doesn't have this new person question that I have as new guy. But have we had that intention of attempting to backfill, or was it just, we'll figure it out?
Ms. Whalen or Ms. Flores?
Senator Fateh, I don't have the answer to that question about what the legislature's intent is.
Yeah, all right, I guess that's to us. And so it's, you know, the contemplation, I'm sorry, Chair Fateh, I did not get recognized.
Senator Clark, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Fateh. So thank you. I think you know, what I'm just trying to think through is, we know the value. We debated around here how to make sure that this was well-funded, and it was well-funded, but not well enough, because we've got folks who want to go to the great colleges throughout this place. So this state of Minnesota. So I guess for me, this is just a reminder of, we've got good institutions. Let's figure it out.
I think the question was, and I was just talking with Sam here, I think the question that was asked, is there a limit on the amount of funds that can be pulled from fiscal year 27 for 26?
Chair Fateh, I apologize, I did not understand that question. There isn't a limit. The transfer authority is there, and there's no number value there. It just allows us to have that transfer authority. I will note, we engaged with our stakeholders. We monthly meet as an advisory committee that I convene, and we asked our campus partners, and we're very transparent about the issue that enrollment continued to increase more than anyone projected, which again is a good thing, right? Our students are staying here, they're finding value in our institutions across all sectors, and staying in the state of Minnesota and seeing that as promising for their futures, as well as that we're attracting students who previously didn't think college was possible for them, and definitely not at staying at home and being able to pursue that. And so because of those two shifting dynamics, we did engage with our partners, and they felt, given the timing, you know, it's in mid-November, the middle of the year, when we had posed, what do you think about doing mid-year parameter changes where we adjust grants yet during the current academic year versus pushing the program to the following academic year. And overwhelmingly, we heard from our constituents that they really thought they wanted to keep it stable for students and maintain stability in the program for the current aid year. Students and parents often sign up for payment plans. They plan all year round for what it's going to be when they go to college, and it's very difficult for them to make mid-year changes. And so the consensus we received from our stakeholder engagement was to address the problem in fiscal year 27, which we, of course, respected, and that's what we decided to do. That does, however, make the problem a little bit larger that we have to deal with in fiscal year 27.
Thank you for that. Does that help, Senator Clark?
They followed Chair Fateh, you followed legislative intent, and we now get to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clark. Are there any remaining questions? Senator Verbain.
Thank you. I was just looking at one of the first slides too that shows the breakdown by institution type. Do you have that by the percentage of dollars or like the average award amount per institution type?
Ms. Whalen or Ms. Flores?
Thank you, Chair and Senator Verbain. I do. So we also would be happy to send that information along if it'd be better in an electronic format. What I can tell you is that in terms of the percent of, let's see, so we had, okay, that's percent of recipients. So percent of dollars awarded to, let's see, do I not have this broken out? what I have right in front of me is that for private institutions, roughly 41% of state grant dollars awarded to four-year programs goes to private institutions in the state. That's private nonprofit and private for-profit. And then among two-year institutions, or two-year programs, roughly 16% of funding in those institution types goes to those programs. I could come up with a full number for you afterwards if you like. And then I can also look at, you wanted, was it individual award amounts or like total dollars awarded by institution type?
Senator Umar-Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, so as you were starting to list those out, that was exactly what I was looking for in terms of the percentage of dollars that's going to the institutions. And then I was just wondering average award amount by institution.
Ms. Whalen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So for our Minnesota State two-year colleges, the average award last year was around $1,100. At our Minnesota State four-year institutions, the average award was roughly $2,500. At the University of Minnesota system, it was $5,600. Among private nonprofit institutions, that average award was $5,300 last year. And then among for-profit institutions, it was $2,300 for a total average award of $2,900.
Thank you, Senator Umar-Bain. And thank you both for your testimony. Appreciate y'all. Next up, we have Mr. Paul Sirkvinek, President of the Minnesota Private Colleges Council, as well as Ben Stomes, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, Director of Strategic Analytics and Financial Strategy from the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University.
Chair Fateh and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the state grant program. I'm Paul Sirkvinek, and I serve as president of the Minnesota Private College Council. I'm joined today by Ben Stomes, whose role at College of St. Benedict's and St. John's University includes overseeing student financial aid. I would note for the members, your packet also includes a letter from the financial aid director at Hamline University. I want to begin, Chair Fateh, by thanking you and committee members for the deep commitment you've had to the state grant program. Last year, in the face of a $240 million deficit in the program, this committee made the program their top priority and proposed $100 million of additional funding for the program. Our colleges and our students are grateful for all you did last year to protect low-income students to the greatest degree possible as you work to resolve last year's deficit. The $100 million shortfall facing the state program this year is being driven by increasing enrollments, as you heard from the Office of Higher Education staff. 2 years ago, there were 71,000 students in the state grant program. Last year, that number rose to 76,000, and it's now projected to be 88,000 before state grant rationing in the coming academic year. This is great news after a decade of declining enrollments in Minnesota. To have a robust workforce and a strong state economy, we need more students to complete a post-secondary degree or credential. As a result of the new shortfall, OHE has issued state grant awarding parameters that will ration state grants. Under these rationing parameters, state grant recipients will face very large reductions in their awards. Reductions so large that for many, college may no longer be affordable. I want to try to summarize those impacts as we understand them so far. More than 18,000 students statewide will lose their state grant completely. That's about 20% of the projected state grant recipients next year. The remaining 70,000 state grant recipients will have their grants reduced by an average of 38%. Because of the way the rationing works, the largest impact will be on families and students with incomes over $60,000, those who mostly don't receive a Pell Grant, but still have significant financial need. Cuts to grants for these students will range from $3,000 to $7,000 for students enrolled full-time in bachelor degree programs. Total state grant funds awarded to these students will be cut by 73% due to rationing, and 57% of these students will lose their grant entirely. At private nonprofit colleges, nearly 3,000 students will lose their entire state grant. That's 19% of recipients at our institutions. The remaining 12,000 students will have their grants significantly reduced. Students who receive a Pell Grant will see further reductions of 13 to 21%. Students in the family income range of $60,000 to $80,000 will see grant reductions of 44 to 61%. Higher education institutions understand the budget challenges facing the state. However, the state will be poorer in the future if these state grant reductions are not mitigated, because many potential college graduates now enrolled will not have the financial resources necessary to complete the bachelor's, associate's, or technical degree or certificate required for the jobs that will fuel our economy in the coming decades. In this session, we hope you will find resources to meaningfully reduce the shortfall, at least for this coming academic year, even if that means one-time funding. While it may not be possible to eliminate the entire shortfall or permanently fix the shortfall this year, you will make a tremendous difference for lower-income college students if these large cuts to state grants are significantly reduced before the start of the fall semester. Thank you, and I want you to now hear from Ben Stamas, who can give you a perspective from a campus.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Stamas.
Thank you,
Please
Chair.
introduce yourself for the record, and you may begin.
Thank you, Chair Fateh and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. My name is Ben Stamas. I'm the Director of Strategic Analytics and Financial Strategy at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, which is also my alma mater in St. Joseph and Collegeville. As part of the responsibilities associated with my role, I oversee the efforts of our financial aid offices to provide support to our more than 2,600 undergraduate students, nearly 85% of whom call Minnesota home. For the current academic year, 613 of our students are receiving support from the Minnesota State Grant Program. Those 600 plus students come to us from 55 of Minnesota's 87 counties. I'd like to share some highlights of the analysis we've conducted as we've begun to understand the potential impact the rationing of academic year 2026-27 Minnesota state grants might have on those students and their families. For starters, if that same group of more than 600 students were to be awarded based on the academic year 2026-27 rationing parameters, we estimate 170, nearly 28%, would no longer qualify for any Minnesota state grant support. In the current year, those 170 students are relying on an average of $4,000 in state grant funding to make their educational pursuits a reality. Beyond those losing eligibility, nearly 450 remaining recipients would see their grants drop by an average of over $2,400 per student. In total, the estimated funding loss for those 613 students at our institutions would be nearly $1.8 million and represents a reduction of over 40% in support. To give you a little better sense of what it might look like for some individual families, I want to share a couple of examples. The first example I have to share is that of a single-parent household, family of 4, in the 7-county Twin Cities metropolitan area. The family has 2 students currently in college and has an adjusted gross income of under $75,000. Under the updated awarding guidelines, the student attending the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University would see a reduction of more than $3,000 in state grant support. Assuming the same would be the case for the other student in the family, that impact equates to nearly 9% of their total family income. Similarly, the second example I'd like to share is that of a family of 3 in Greater Minnesota with 1 student in college. The family's federal needs analysis indicates a student aid index of approximately 5,000 with a family adjusted gross income of under $85,000. The state grant support for this student is projected to decrease by more than $4,500 under the new parameters, a reduction of close to 60%. These examples are by no means extreme cases. They are instances that are very typical of what we're anticipating students facing as we transition into next academic year. Institutionally, we're simply not able to fill in the gap associated with the anticipated $1.8 million loss for our students as we continue to navigate an increasingly complex landscape for higher education. Given this, we are very concerned about the potential retention, persistence, and completion implications that might result from the reduced support for students not only at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, but across the entire state. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today to share some of these insights. We appreciate your continued attention to this matter.
Thank you for your testimony, members. Are there any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Up next, we'll hear from Melissa Manning, who's the Director of Communications and Government Relations for Minnesota State. You can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Melissa Fanning, and I work in government relations for Minnesota State, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today to talk about the state grant shortfall. I do want to let you know that Chris Halling, the Minnesota State System Director for Financial Aid, is not able to be with us today, so he sends his regrets. So I am here on his behalf to let you know Minnesota State's thoughts on the state grant shortfall. First of all, though, I do want to acknowledge and express our gratitude for the investment that you have all made in the state grant program. Obviously, this investment has helped thousands of Minnesota students afford college, so thank you for that. It's important that students can plan for their college costs, knowing what their financial aid award will be. And when there's a shortfall, awards have to be reduced. Students may simply not be able to afford to attend college. If that does happen, not only does this negatively impact students, but the state of Minnesota loses as well, right? As our students are the future of the state of Minnesota's workforce. With that said, Minnesota State is supportive of the rationing implemented by the Office of Higher Education, and we believe it's important to remain consistent and as timely as possible in the approach taken when addressing these shortfalls. We would also recommend that a more in-depth examination of the state grant program be undertaken in order to more thoroughly consider alternative approaches in the future, and we certainly look forward as a system being part of those conversations with the Office of Higher Education. So thank you very much, and if there's any questions, I will try to answer them, but again, as I said, our system director was unfortunately unable to be here today, and I'd be happy to take any questions back to him.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll have Nate Peterson, Executive Director of Student Finance at the University of Minnesota, and Meredith Fergus, Scholarship and Financial Aid Analyst at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Senate Higher Education Committee. It will just be me today. Good afternoon, and for the record, my name is Nate Peterson, and I serve as the Executive Director of Student Finance at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Today, I'm representing the University of Minnesota system, including our Crookston, Morris, Duluth, Rochester, and Twin Cities campuses, to discuss financial aid matters relating to the Minnesota State Grant and North Star Promise programs. I testify today to offer comments on the rationing parameters that the Minnesota Office of Higher Education has released for the 2026-2027 academic year. I am encouraged by the efforts of our higher education colleagues to promote stability within the Minnesota State Grant and North Star Promise programs, and are appreciative of the legislative support for these programs. The Minnesota State Grant is an integral part of the financial aid package for University of Minnesota eligible students. Minnesota residents from low and moderate income families rely upon this to help fund their education. The state grant award parameters issued by the Office of Higher Education were used in sending our estimated financial aid offers to incoming students earlier this month. These offers play a large role in students determining which institution best fits their financial needs. Both incoming and returning students look to these programs in addition to the Pell Grant, state funds, and other institutional scholarships and grants to help fund their academic career. For our current year, just for some numbers to share, this is updated through 2/26. For fall of 2025, system-wide, 13,099 students received a Minnesota State Grant totaling $44.6 million, and this represents approximately 30% of our undergraduate students. For spring 2026 to date, system-wide, 12,141 students received Minnesota State Grant totaling $41 million, and aid is still dispersing at this point in time. For current year for our North Star Promise programs, for fall of 2025, system-wide 4,343 students received North Star Promise, totaling $9.2 million, and this is 11% of our undergraduate students. And for spring 2026 to date, system-wide, 4,205 students have received North Star Promise, totaling $8.9 million, and aid is still dispersing. With the launch of the 2026-2027 FAFSA on October 1st, 2025, the University of Minnesota system has already implemented a communications campaign encouraging current, admitted, and prospective students to fill out the FAFSA to meet Minnesota State Grant and North Star Promise application deadlines. We look forward to continuing to partner with our Office of Higher Education colleagues to successfully implement the Minnesota State Grant, North Star Promise, and other financial aid programs within the University of Minnesota system. Thank you for allowing us to testify, and at this time, I welcome questions from the committee.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Not seeing any. Thank you. Senator Clark?
Thank you, Chair. I guess I didn't have any specific questions. I think it's back to my initial statements of the state grant program works, and it is a program that keeps folks in Minnesota, keeps our kids here. Selfishly, with a senior graduating this year, I certainly hope she stays. But we've seen it across the board, and we had presentations last year about how many kids are leaving Minnesota for college and how many are staying. And this seems to be one that has really found a way to keep kids across the income spectrum here, but in particular, the lower end, and that investment is going to be worth dividends to us for our long-term economy and making sure that we have the workforce that meets our future needs. And so I think for us, the challenge is how do we find a way to ensure that we are keeping this promise that we've made to ensure that our most talented folks are staying in Minnesota and we keep building on the strong workforce that we have with the kids that we have here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Clark. There's a lot of work that went into the changes we made to the state grant program last year, and I know I was really grateful for the changes that our chair and the Senate championed, especially for our student parents and independents without dependents, but there is a lot of work ahead. That conducts our committee business. I just wanted to make sure folks know next Tuesday we're going to do a joint tour with the Capital Investment Committee at the University of Minnesota. If you haven't already, please RSVP to our committee administrator, Sam Parmakar. And then we'll be back in committee on Thursday. And with that, We're adjourned.